My name is Lucas, and I was born second. My brother Nathan was the golden child from the very beginning. He was charming, athletic, the pride of my father, and the jewel of my mother's eye. When I came along 2 years later, the comparisons started instantly and never stopped. "Why can't you be more like Nathan?" was the unofficial motto of my childhood. Nathan never had to try hard to win approval. I, on the other hand, had to fight for scraps. And the truth is, I stopped trying somewhere around 15. I learned to keep my head down, work hard, and stay quiet. But that didn't mean I wasn't watching. Nathan always had a way of manipulating people. If he got caught cheating on a test, he'd flash his grin and get out of it. If he broke something at home, he'd blame it on me, and they'd believe him without question. I knew then that Nathan didn't just want to be loved more, he wanted to erase me. We grew up on a small family ranch in Northern California, one that had been passed down through generations. It wasn't huge, but it was ours. Land, livestock, a house built by our great-grandfather, and most importantly, legacy. My father was proud of it, and he made it clear that keeping it in the family was his biggest priority. I always assumed we'd share it, that maybe someday we'd run it together. But Nathan had other plans. He wanted it all, and when he realized he couldn't charm his way into inheriting it alone, he started planting seeds. I noticed small things at first. Dad would make strange comments like, "You're just not built for this kind of work, Lucas," or "You don't seem committed." Meanwhile, Nathan would mysteriously be in the right place at the right time to swoop in and save the day. He'd take on the morning feed when I was out sick, but then make a point of telling everyone I ditched him. When I was away at college, the only one in the family to even attempt higher education, Nathan started positioning himself as the sole heir. He called it holding things down, but in reality, he was slowly rewriting the story of who deserved the ranch. I came back home one summer to find he'd converted one of the barns into his personal workshop without asking anyone. He acted like he was doing Dad a favor. "We're modernizing," he said. "Gotta move with the times." I didn't argue. I just watched. The moment that changed everything came when Dad got sick. It was sudden, a stroke that left him partially paralyzed and unable to speak clearly. He was still sharp, but communication became a struggle. Mom relied heavily on Nathan, and I started noticing that I was being shut out of more and more conversations, decisions made without me, updates I had to hear through the grapevine. Then the will changed. I found out accidentally. I overheard Nathan talking to a lawyer over the phone in the kitchen while he thought I was outside. "It's done. Full transfer. Lucas is out. Yeah, Dad signed." My blood ran cold. I confronted him, and of course, he denied everything. "You're paranoid," he said. "You always have been." But I saw the smirk. He wanted me gone. He was trying to make it official. I checked the county records the next day. Sure enough, a new deed had been filed. Everything, the land, the ranch, the assets, were now in Nathan's name. Supposedly signed willingly by my father. I knew Dad would never do that without talking to me, but he couldn't speak properly anymore. Nathan had used that, exploited his vulnerability to get him to sign legal documents, probably without full understanding. It wasn't just betrayal, it was theft, and I wasn't going to let it go. What Nathan didn't know was that I'd learned a thing or two about law in college, not enough to practice, but enough to see the red flags. I started digging, and what I found gave me the one thing I needed: leverage. The story was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. Because if Nathan wanted a war, he was about to find out I'd been silently preparing for it my whole life. After I discovered the deed transfer, I didn't confront Nathan again. I knew better. He thrived on drama and manipulation, and any direct attack would just give him room to twist things. So instead, I got smart. I reached out to Dad's old attorney, a man named Carl Jennings, who had been with our family for over 2 decades. He hadn't handled the recent changes. Nathan used someone new. That was the first red flag. Carl was shocked to hear about the updated will and deed. "Your father never mentioned any of this to me," he said. "Are you sure it's legit?" I sent him the documents I pulled from the county. He looked them over and called me back the same day. "Lucas, these signatures don't match." He sent them off to a handwriting expert. Meanwhile, I kept smiling in front of Nathan. I'd visit Dad like normal, sit with him, talk, and pay close attention. I noticed something strange. Anytime I mentioned the ranch or the will, his eyes darkened, like he wanted to speak, but couldn't. I started recording our visits, not because I wanted to exploit him, but because I needed proof, something that could later support my claim that he was coerced. The more I recorded, the clearer it became. Dad had no idea what had really happened. Then Carl called me with confirmation. The signature on the deed wasn't just inconsistent, it was forged. And the notary listed? Turns out she was a friend of Nathan's girlfriend. I suddenly had a trail of fraud, and I wasn't going to waste it. I filed an anonymous complaint with the state board and hired a private investigator to look deeper into Nathan's recent activities. I wanted every dirty detail, and it didn't take long before some started surfacing. Nathan had taken out loans against the property. He'd sold a chunk of land behind Dad's back. And worst of all, he'd applied for a federal agriculture grant under Dad's name, forging more documents in the process. He wasn't just greedy, he was reckless. And I was done playing nice. With the evidence stacking up, I knew I could already go to the authorities. But I also knew Nathan was slippery. He'd find some way to wriggle out, twist the story, make me look bitter or jealous. That's what manipulators like him do. So I waited, and I kept collecting. The private investigator kept digging, and soon he sent me photos of Nathan meeting with a land developer, one who'd been eyeing our family property for years. Nathan wasn't just forging documents, he was planning to sell off everything. Even the old barn Dad built with his bare hands. Even the creek we used to fish in as kids. I felt sick, but I stayed quiet. I needed Dad to be safe first and foremost. I spoke to his doctor, off the record. She told me his mental state was declining faster than expected, but stress would only accelerate it. If there was anything I wanted to do, she warned, I had to make sure it wouldn't throw him into panic or despair. So I began quietly preparing to have Dad declared mentally unfit to make legal decisions. It wasn't what I wanted. I hated even thinking it. But it was the only way to protect him from Nathan's grip. I filed the petition, using the doctor's evaluations and video footage I'd collected. In the meantime, Carl helped me prepare an emergency legal block, a court order that would freeze any sale or transfer of the ranch pending investigation. That way, even if Nathan tried to finalize a deal, it wouldn't go through. The court gave me a temporary guardianship over Dad's legal affairs. That was my green light. And when I showed up at the ranch, Nathan was already there, yelling at a real estate agent over the phone. "The deal falls apart if we don't close this week," I heard him say. I stepped into the kitchen, holding the documents in my hand. "It's already fallen apart," I said. The court froze everything. He looked up like he'd seen a ghost. "What did you do?" I laid the papers on the table. "You forged Dad's signature. You committed fraud. And I have it all. Recordings, witnesses, notarized inconsistencies, even the PI's report. You're done." Nathan laughed at first, like it was a joke. But then he saw my face and the badge of the investigator walking in behind me. That laughter died quick. He stammered, tried to bluster, but this time it didn't work. Not with the law on my side. Not with everything documented. But I didn't press charges yet. Not immediately. Because I wanted to see what he'd do next when the walls truly started closing in.
Nathan was silent as the investigator explained what would happen next. Audits, formal interviews, a court-ordered financial review of the estate. I could see the panic behind his eyes, but he was still pretending to be calm, still trying to talk his way out. "Look," he said, forcing a smile as the investigator stepped outside to make a call. "This is all a misunderstanding. I was just trying to keep the ranch running." "By forging Dad's name?" I snapped. "By planning to sell everything?" He dropped the act then. "All right, fine. I screwed up, okay? But it's not like you were around helping either. I had to keep things together while you were off living your little life." I didn't even flinch. "I was paying Dad's medical bills, quietly, while you were gutting the place." That shut him up. He sat down, rubbed his face. "What do you want from me?" I looked him straight in the eye. "Nothing. I just want you out." He didn't fight it anymore. He knew it was over. A week later, Nathan formally signed over all administrative rights to the estate. My guardianship of Dad became permanent under court order, and all assets were protected from further interference. Still, I hadn't decided what to do about the criminal side. Fraud, forgery, attempted theft. He could go to prison. He knew that. That's why, late one evening, he showed up at my door. No warning, no bluster this time. Just him, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. "Can we talk?" he asked. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I just stepped outside and closed the door behind me. We stood on the porch, two brothers, but something between us was broken beyond repair. "I was angry," he said finally. "You always had a way of making Dad proud. I thought if I could take over the ranch, finally make something of it, he'd see me the same way." "So you lied? Sold it out?" I asked. "You could have come to me. I would have helped you." He nodded, eyes glossy. "I know. That's what makes it worse." Silence stretched between us. Then he added, "I don't want to go to jail. I'll sign whatever you need. I'll disappear if that's what it takes." I took a breath. Deep, controlled. "You don't get to choose what it takes anymore, Nathan." He looked down. "I'm sorry." Maybe he meant it. Maybe he didn't. But I didn't forgive him. Not then, not now. Some lines can't be uncrossed. The next day, I spoke with our family lawyer and filed the final report. What the state decided to do with it was no longer up to me. I had done my part. I had protected what mattered. And Nathan would finally face the consequences. For everything.
Weeks passed, and the fallout from Nathan's deception spread like wildfire through the family. Our cousins called me shocked, embarrassed they'd ever believed his version of things. And Carol, who had once called me the selfish one, sent a letter apologizing, blaming herself for enabling Nathan's arrogance. But I didn't need apologies. I needed closure. The state launched a formal investigation into the forgery and fraud. They found decades of financial manipulation, and not just involving the ranch. Nathan had been using family trust funds as his personal piggy bank for years. With overwhelming evidence, the DA offered him a deal. Plead guilty, repay what he stole, and serve a reduced sentence in county jail. He took it. There was no courtroom drama, just a quiet, pitiful, guilty, and a 3-year sentence. 3 years to sit with the weight of what he'd done. 3 years without a ranch to ruin or people to manipulate. I didn't attend the sentencing. I had no interest in watching him walk into the consequences of his own making. Instead, I spent that morning on the ranch, walking the fields alone. The air was calm, honest. Once Nathan was out of the picture, I made the next move. Not out of revenge, but out of necessity. I restructured everything. The ranch was no longer just a decaying memory of our father's past. It became a working, thriving operation again. I hired real staff, paid them well, modernized the equipment, the barns, even the damn office. I gave it a name that mattered. Legacy Roots. Not for Nathan, not even for Dad. For the history I was determined to protect, and for the future I was finally building on my own terms. A year later, an article was published in a national agricultural journal. How one man revived his family's dying ranch and built an empire from betrayal. It went viral. Investors called, influencers toured. Suddenly, I wasn't just the guy who saved a ranch, I was the guy who turned his brother's greed into a legacy. The irony? The same land Nathan tried to sell now earned more than it ever had, and his name wasn't on a single deed. Then one day, I got a letter. From prison. Nathan's handwriting. The first line read, "I saw the article. I'm proud of you." I didn't read the rest. I burned it. Because this story didn't end with forgiveness. It ended with justice. And a new beginning I carved out of everything he tried to steal.